again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic, sad. Let's do it. Who is someone you know, personally or otherwise, who has ruined their lives, and how? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Meth. Less than 6 months between getting into it and the police pulling his body out of a river. I helped an old friend of my mother-in-law for some time. She was in recovery for some years. She had drank so heavily for so long, she developed a neurological disorder which left her debilitated. She gradually lost her balance, her motor skills and coordination, and is now hospitalized and unable to care for herself. She's almost a decade younger than me, and her life of independence is over. She will remain bedridden and rely on others for her most basic needs for the remaining years of her life. This is neither far-fetched nor the worst-case scenario. People die from addiction every day. Took out a mortgage on his house and leveraged all of his other assets to go all in on Luna coin. It worked beautifully until it didn't. Staying in bad relationships, doubling down and marrying and having children. Now they have the same relationship problems that they had 10 years ago, but with children involved. Over the years, we've watched my brother's now former best friend ruin his life. It probably started my senior year of high school. I went to a friend's prom and saw him there. Total shock, as he's my brother's age, nearly 8 years older than me. I asked what he was doing there, and he said he was taking his girlfriend to prom. That's when, and I think my family found out he was 25 and dating a 17 to 18-year-old. They continued dating, and it's of course not a good relationship. They have a child. She gets a DUI, charged with the child in the car. At some point in time, he becomes addicted to hard drugs. Friend is struggling in all facets, so my brother gives him a job at his place of work. Friend ends up stealing equipment, both company and personal equipment bought by coworkers. My brother fires him after giving him many chances to come forward and admit what he did. I'm omitting a lot of stuff, but I believe my brother is now NC. Sometimes I'll hear former friend's name mentioned, and people will giggle, saying he's still up to his usual shenanigans, doesn't have a life together, etc. One time, someone mentioned a former friend's name as a scare tactic to get my nephews into doing their homework, like, if you don't work now, you'll end up like him. I know it makes my brother sad. He tends to be very reserved when talking about this. I remember growing up with this guy and looking up to him almost. As a teen, he was very friendly, capable, and outgoing. Always makes that initial high school prom interaction more bizarre and creepy. I knew a few folks in college who got hooked on meth and never pulled themselves out of it. But the funnier story is a guy I knew in college who stayed in line all night to buy a PS2, which caused him to totally blow out a big lab report, which ultimately meant he had to switch his major. Family member addicted to shopping. Her and her husband made really good money and could have had a very comfortable life. Every single year, she decided she didn't like their house, sold at a loss, and then renovated and bought all new designer furniture for every new house. On top of that, she constantly bought multiple pieces of the same designer clothes and jewelry. Why? Art, cosmetic procedures, etc. Eventually, they couldn't even get a mortgage anymore and were in an insane amount of debt. Lost their cars and everything else they owned. She ended up stealing her mother's credit card to use for restaurants and attempted to make a bunch of frivolous lawsuits, which just resulted in more legal debt. I have a cousin who fell in with the wrong crowd in secondary school. He came from a good family, they had a nice home and plenty of money. He had a good upbringing and socialized with good people, and he had every opportunity in the world to make something of himself, but instead he started dabbing in recreational drugs. It started out pretty innocent, some weed and some uppers when he was partying, but it quickly progressed into a horrible addiction to both meth and heroin. In the space of 2 years, he had gotten to a point where he was actively in hiding from one of the biggest drug gangs in our country. That gang actually showed up at his grandparents' house demanding their money, who then had to pay up. This happened several times, leaving his grandparents close to bankruptcy. He kept running. After another few years of using, he got brave and thought that maybe they weren't looking for him any longer. He had gotten hundreds of thousands worth of drugs to push at this point, but had used them all instead. He moved into an apartment and tried to start a life for himself. He got off the drugs, and while he still smoked weed, he seemed to really be doing better. That is, until one night when he, his wife, and 2 children were sleeping and their apartment was set on fire. They barely made it out. The stress of it all drove him toward drugs again. Now, around 5 years later, his wife left him. He got her hooked too. He abandoned his 2 children, who are now with other relatives, and has gotten another girl pregnant. He's stolen from everybody he knows, and can't even be trusted inside of anyone's house anymore. He has been to rehab countless times, but it never helps. He gets out and goes straight back to his old ways. His grandparents filed for bankruptcy after his 4th stint in rehab. His dad committed suicide. His mother sadly passed away in a car accident. His children don't even remember what he looks like. He can't hold down a job. He lives on the streets. He ruined his own life, but also the lives of everyone close to him. Now that really is a tragedy, because, ruining your own life is sadly a choice that you can make if you want to, but sometimes we forget the impact that that choice may have on everyone else around you that actually love and care for you. So, cautionary tale, sad. A friend from high school won $1,000 a week for life, never went to college, never held down a long-term job, always worried some lady is trying to take his money by getting pregnant or stealing it through marriage. He had a very mediocre life without much progression or new relationships. The rest of the friend group used to think he was the luckiest guy alive. Now we all just try to keep his spirits up when we get together and keep our advice to ourselves. He's aware of the solution to his problems at a 10-mile view, but the $1,000 a week has sapped his will to execute any self-improvement plan. I watched someone convince himself he had been wronged. He was an Iraq veteran and wore it like a badge on his sleeve. Any perceived slight was met with immediately declaring his veteran status and demanding special treatment. He pushed away everyone who tried to help him, kept digging himself deeper and deeper over any perceived slight, real or otherwise, verbally assaulted those in position to save him, threw away a career, threw away a family, all over something that never even happened. He was so convinced the boogeymen were out to get him that he became his own boogeyman. We worked together, and I recall the final meeting where we all had our heads together trying to figure out how we could help him. There was so much empathy and sympathy in that room. Then he finally entered, verbal guns blazing, and all we could do was stare at him with our mouths agape. He became his own worst villain and cast his own life into ruins. I think he's a vacuum cleaner salesman in the deep south now. I used to hang out with a guy who was one of those super friendly, talkative, gets along with everyone to a fault kind of guys. I will call him Jack. Jack was the kind of guy who would order 3 drinks and 3 shots right before happy hour ended, and then would proceed to down all 3 shots and chug 2 of the drinks. He was never really at home unless he was throwing a party, so his entire diet consisted of alcohol, weed, and takeout. Then one day Jack collapsed and was taken to the hospital. Turns out his kidneys were shutting down. He had been taking antacids constantly, and so often that it just wrecked his kidneys. They had to put him in a medically induced coma, and he was in the hospital for months. When Jack got out, we started seeing him out and about, and he would still have the occasional drink, but gone were the days of ordering so many right at the end of happy hour. He didn't care about the price of the drink, because he only ever had 1 or 2. One thing he realized was that he had been spending a small fortune on booze. He could spend 1/4 of that on weed and have a shit ton of weed. That became his new vice. That would have been fine. He was still the same guy he was before. Then Jack started going harder. It didn't take long for him to develop a very hardcore coke habit, to the point that he was financially ruining himself. He was hiding vials in the bathroom ceiling at the bar and other places. He descended into a very bad place. All of us tried at multiple points to intervene and go something. Anything. He refused to listen or acknowledge. One by one, people turned away from him. The last time I saw Jack, he was coked out of his mind at the bar and came up and tried to talk to me. We hadn't talked in months. After a minute of rambling, I just asked him what happened to him. He asked what I meant, and I told him, "Man, you were great, and people loved hanging with you. Not everything about you revolves around your next line. What happened, man?" I wasn't upset, mad, or accusatory. I was sad. He got upset and walked away from me. I never really saw him after that. I hadn't been hanging out at that bar as much as I used to. I would hear about him here. Stories about how he was kicked out and banned from every bar in the area. See, he was still very much into the coke, but he offset that by starting to drink heavily again and say and do shit that just wasn't acceptable. Then, one night a couple of years later, I ran into some of the guys that were part of that crew from back in the day. We were talking and catching up. One of them had kept in touch with Jack, and he was telling us about how Jack had finally scared himself his life was around. He was offered a good job in a town across the state, and he started earlier that week. All of us agreed that was great. A fresh start in a new place might be good for him. And then he told the rest of the story. On his first day, Jack called in and told them he needed a vacation day and gave them a blatantly false story. I shook my head and said, okay, that sounds more like the Jack I remember. The next night, I was at a bar watching football, and the guy who had kept in touch with Jack came in and asked me if I had heard. Jack was found dead in his apartment. We found out later that his health problems never really went away. The day he died, he was at a doctor's appointment where he was told that he didn't have more than a year left. The amount of damage done to his body just simply could not be fixed, and the time to do something about it had passed by a couple of years. No one is 100% certain about what happened next, but it appears he stopped at a liquor store on his way home, bought a shitload of booze, and then went home and proceeded to drink himself to death. Someone in our friend group keeps having kids with people and then leaving, effing him financially because of child support. He can't hold any jobs and is stolen from friends. Right now he's crashing on one of my friend's couches. I don't know why they're allowing him to stay there. Knew a girl in high school and fell out of touch aside from seeing her occasional Facebook post. We had come from a relatively affluent town outside of Charleston, but drugs were widely available. One day on Facebook, I saw the young woman was in the hospital getting her arm amputated. She had fallen into hard drugs. The next post I saw was her bragging how her dope dealer visited her in the hospital and helped her shoot up. My heart broke to see something as disastrous as having your arm amputated wasn't enough for her to get the help she needed. I'd say I hope she's doing better, but I don't think she is. I know a guy who killed a girl in a hit and run, then went back out that night. Walked around town like nothing happened for like 6 months before his friend turned him in. And now he'll be in prison for like 8 years. Don't drink and drive. My father-in-law keeps giving his pathological liar, thief, drug-addicted son money to the cost of his savings, his retirement, his house, his marriage, and his relationship with every other family member, including my husband. Twice a month his pension hits, and twice a month his pet psychopath pops up his new, increasingly improbable stories explaining why he needs money this time. Sometimes he doesn't bother asking, just steals it. When my father-in-law was in the hospital with heart problems, my brother-in-law broke into his bank account and drained it. The truth is drugs. The truth has always been drugs. The truth may someday not be drugs, but it ain't today. My father-in-law continues to insist that the problem has never been drugs, even when he's calling everyone up, begging for money to send him to rehab. My father-in-law has never made it clear that he doesn't care how many other people's savings have been destroyed in his quest to never, ever, ever say no to his precious, favorite golden baby boy. He used to treat my husband as a human ATM until my husband put his foot down. At that point, he pitched a giant screaming public fit and refused to speak to us for over a year. It's sad, and don't get me wrong, but also, frankly, as someone who has a husband and a household and a future to protect, F that guy. I went to tech school with a guy. We both got IT jobs at the same company in the 1980s. We were co-workers in an office job. He was very good, and I expected him to be at least as good as myself in his career. In the early 1990s, he left his wife and just started doing stupid stuff with booze and drugs. He's been in and out of jail since then. That was ruinous enough, but it can always get worse. The real ruining of his life was when he killed his father in 2020. His father had dementia, and my friend was supposed to be his caretaker. With COVID shutting down probation reporting, my friend started drinking again. He got mad at his poor father while drunk and strangled him to death. He was sentenced to 7 to 25 years for third-degree murder. I still talk to him from prison. A spoiled kid from a well-off family in a nearby small town, so big fish in a little pond, around aged 20, was having a party at his house. He jokingly pulled out an old, antique handgun out from a drawer and aimed it at his friend of his, also maybe around 20 years old. You can guess what happened next. I know someone with 8 kids by 7 different guys, all boys, and she still wants a girl. The kids call every new guy dad. I'm pretty sure she had 7 kids by the time she was 25. She's in her 30s now. She'll never end up with a decent guy. Poor kids. They'll have goofy names that rhyme. I'm talking names that nobody else on the planet has. Cousin of mine. Long story. Jill is, in my opinion, mildly intellectually disabled. She always had school issues, and the school would send home reports basically saying she was fit only for fast food jobs. My uncle would just chuckle about it. My mom tried talking to him so many times, suggesting trade schools for Jill. When Jill started hanging out with a bad crowd, she tried warning my uncle. He laughed. His kid was 12, and he'd just let her go visit adult cousins of ours with severe drug and alcohol problems for a day or two at a time. Jill started dating at 18. A girl who was 15. You can guess where that went when her dad found out. Jill got a slap on the wrist, but within a week was caught with a girl again, served 2 years in prison, and became an SO. Jill gets out and has a live-in relationship with a girl from prison. They're both recovering addicts, so they both relapse. At some point, my cousin starts robbing delivery drivers while high, gets caught, is lucky to only get 2 years in prison because my uncle bears her out and gets a great attorney. Gets out, starts dating another addict from prison. Over the next 5 years, steals or borrows over $90,000 from her stepdad. Cycles between living with him and on the street. Girlfriend dies of a stroke. Jill is now mentally ill. She believes her girlfriend had a baby boy and is in the hospital. Jill talks to her dead girlfriend sometimes. She gets violent with her mom, who is scared of her. Stepdad cycles between wanting to walk out and feeling helpless. They don't know if it's from years of drugs, schizophrenia, or something else. I don't know what they're doing to help. It's hard to say it's only Jill's fault. This started when she was a child, and all the adults responsible for her ignored warnings. She's had so many chances. She's 36 now, and at this point probably isn't too far off from an overdose or getting killed in another robbery. I was a kid when this happened, but a guy in town shot himself in the stomach because he'd left his wife for his mistress, who then chickened out on leaving her husband. What made it super bizarre, and big news, was that he was the DARE officer at the local elementary school, where she was the principal. He survived, and both were run out of town. I work in project management for construction. I've seen many apprentices fall into the pit of alcohol and drug addiction within the first couple of years of them being on the job and losing everything. Thankfully, it tends to happen earlier in their life, so some of them are able to recover and bounce back. Others aren't so lucky. Another is my best friend in high school. He became a drug dealer and dropped out before graduating. He eventually got caught on camera selling a couple of kilograms of cocaine to an informant and served several years in prison.